She's not stable enough to handle this kind of money. Look at her credit history, her job record, her emotional outbursts. Those were my sister Emma's words to our family lawyer's wood-paneled office, backed by documents she claimed proved I was unfit for Grandma's inheritance. The lawyer nodded sympathetically as Emma painted me as irresponsible and mentally unstable, someone who would squander the money meant to secure my children's future. Little did they know, Grandma had anticipated every move. What neither of them realized was that every single word Emma spoke was being contradicted by evidence Grandma had hidden in plain sight. Evidence that would expose Emma's lies and reveal the truth about who the real manipulator was. But to understand how we got to that moment, I need to take you back to where it all began. What could a grandmother possibly leave behind that would make her own granddaughter's sister turn into a monster overnight? The answer sits in the pages of a will that nobody saw coming, not even the family lawyer who'd worked with Grandma Rose for 15 years. Grandma Rose wasn't just any grandmother. She was the family matriarch who built something extraordinary from absolutely nothing. At 19, she opened a tiny antique shop in downtown Portland with borrowed money and fierce determination. Over the decades, she transformed that single storefront into a thriving business, investing her profits wisely and watching her portfolio grow year after year. The woman who taught me to appreciate the stories behind old furniture and vintage jewelry had quietly become a financial powerhouse. The reading of her will took place on a gray Tuesday morning in February. The lawyer's office smelled like old leather and fresh coffee, and 12 family members packed into chairs that weren't meant for this many people. My sister Emma sat directly across from me, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against her purse as we waited for the formalities to begin. She kept glancing at the thick manila folder on the lawyer's desk, probably calculating what percentage of Grandma's assets she'd walk away with. Then the lawyer opened his mouth and changed everything. The family home on Maple Street went to me. The antique shop and its entire inventory went to me. The investment portfolio containing bonds, stocks, and retirement accounts went to me. The entire family estate worth multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars, all left to the granddaughter who'd spent countless Saturday afternoons helping sort through estate sales and learning the difference between genuine Victorian pieces and clever reproductions. Emma's face went completely white. Then the blood rushed back, turning her cheeks bright red as she processed what she'd just heard. Her voice cracked when she interrupted the lawyer mid-sentence, demanding to know why she was only receiving Grandma's recipe collection and a few pieces of costume jewelry. The room fell silent except for the sound of papers rustling as the lawyer confirmed that yes, those sentimental items were indeed her entire inheritance. The uncomfortable silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. Uncle Mike cleared his throat and looked down at his hands. Cousin Sarah shifted in her chair and avoided eye contact with anyone. My mom reached over and squeezed my shoulder, but even she seemed shocked by the magnitude of what Grandma had given me. Emma stood up so quickly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor, muttering about favoritism and unfairness as she grabbed her coat and headed for the door. My hands were shaking as I tried to process the reality of what had just happened. My heart was racing so fast I could hear it in my ears, and for a brief moment I pictured myself walking into Target with my kids, letting them pick out whatever school supplies they wanted without checking price tags first. The number felt impossible, like something that happened to other people in movies or lottery commercials. I thought about my kids and how this inheritance could secure their college educations completely. I thought about the mortgage payments that had been keeping me awake at night since my divorce 3 years earlier. I thought about Grandma Rose and wondered if she'd known how desperately I needed this lifeline. The warning sign started 3 days later when my phone rang at 7 in the morning. Emma's voice sounded unnaturally sweet, like honey poured over broken glass. She suggested we should work together to manage the inheritance properly, since it was such a substantial amount and required careful planning. She asked detailed questions about my financial history, wanting to know about my credit score and whether I'd considered hiring a professional money manager. Her interest in my personal struggles during recent difficult years felt invasive, like she was collecting information rather than offering genuine sisterly support. She asked about the job I'd lost during the recession and whether I was still seeing the therapist who'd helped me through my divorce. Every question came wrapped in fake concern, but underneath I could hear something else entirely. She was building a case, though I didn't understand for what. The conversations continued for weeks, always initiated by Emma and always focused on my supposed inability to handle such a significant financial responsibility. She reminded me of every mistake I'd made during my divorce proceedings, every late payment during the months when I was unemployed, every moment of emotional vulnerability when grief over losing Grandma had overwhelmed me. As the calls became more frequent and more pointed, I began to understand that this inheritance represented something much deeper than money. Grandma Rose had chosen me specifically, not because I was perfect or because I'd never struggled, but because she trusted me to honor her legacy and use her gift wisely. She'd watched me rebuild my life after my marriage fell apart, seen me work multiple jobs to keep my kids in the same school district, witnessed my determination to create stability even when everything felt chaotic. This wasn't just about the inheritance. This was Grandma's final act of love and protection for the grandchild she believed would carry forward her values of hard work, integrity, and genuine care for family. She'd seen something in me that even I hadn't recognized yet. Little did I know that Emma had already decided my emotional vulnerability and financial struggles made me the perfect target for a calculated plan that would destroy my reputation and steal everything Grandma had intended for me and my children. But within days, Emma's interviews would take a darker turn. How do you convince an entire family that someone they've known for decades is suddenly mentally unstable and financially irresponsible? Emma figured out the answer 2 weeks after the will reading, and her strategy was more calculated than anything I could have imagined. She didn't start with dramatic accusations or obvious lies. Instead, she began with seemingly innocent conversations, expressing just the right amount of sisterly concern about my well-being during family phone calls. The first sign came during a conversation with our cousin Janet at my nephew's birthday party. Emma mentioned how worried she was about me handling such a large inheritance so soon after my divorce, framing it as genuine care and suggesting that maybe I was still too emotionally fragile to make sound financial decisions. She'd steer conversations toward my past difficulties with surgical precision, bringing up my therapy sessions during discussions about mental health, always with fake concern dripping from her voice. The way she spoke made it sound like she was sharing these details reluctantly, as if protecting me required exposing my vulnerabilities to the rest of the family. Janet later told me about this conversation, but at the time it seemed like normal family concern. But Emma wasn't just talking. She was documenting everything. She started keeping a detailed record of every minor financial mistake I'd made during my divorce 3 years earlier. The time I'd been late on my mortgage payment because my ex-husband delayed sending child support became evidence of financial irresponsibility. The personal loan I'd taken to cover legal fees transformed into proof that I couldn't manage money. Normal struggles that millions of people face during major life transitions suddenly became symptoms of deeper instability in Emma's carefully crafted narrative. Emma began creating completely false narratives about my spending habits. She claimed she'd witnessed me making reckless purchases at the mall, buying expensive clothes I couldn't afford while my kids needed new shoes. She delivered this lie with such conviction that family members started to believe her version of reality, despite the fact that none of these events ever happened. The poison spread slowly but effectively through our family network. Cousins who'd always treated me warmly started asking probing questions about my financial planning. During family dinners, aunts would exchange worried glances when someone mentioned the inheritance. Uncle Mike, who'd congratulated me enthusiastically after the will reading, began suggesting I consider hiring a financial advisor to help manage my windfall. The shift was subtle but unmistakable, like watching people you love slowly turn into strangers who viewed you with suspicion and pity. Emma's masterstroke came when she contacted my ex-husband, David. She convinced him to provide a written statement about what she called my erratic behavior during our marriage breakdown. David, still bitter about our divorce and eager to paint himself as the reasonable party, was happy to cooperate. He described my emotional outbursts during our separation as evidence of mental instability, conveniently forgetting that I'd been dealing with his infidelity and financial deception. Emma assembled these statements, along with her fabricated stories and exaggerated accounts of normal life struggles, into what she called her portfolio of evidence. She printed out old credit reports showing the temporary damage to my score during the divorce proceedings. She gathered medical records from my therapy sessions, taking appointments for anxiety and depression completely out of context to suggest ongoing mental health issues. She even included photos of me looking exhausted at family events, claiming they demonstrated my inability to cope with stress. What Emma didn't know was that Grandma Rose had witnessed her manipulative behavior before. Grandma had always been observant, quietly documenting family dynamics in ways that would later prove crucial to understanding the truth about Emma's character. The most insidious part of Emma's campaign was how she positioned herself throughout the process. She never directly criticized me or suggested I was unfit to inherit Grandma's money. Instead, she expressed heartbreak about having to share these concerns with family members. She'd start conversations by saying how much she loved me and wanted to protect both me and Grandma's legacy. She painted herself as the reluctant whistleblower, forced to speak up because she cared too much to stay silent. I started noticing the change in how family members treated me, but I didn't understand the scope of what Emma was orchestrating. Conversations felt different, more careful. People asked fewer questions about my plans for the inheritance and more questions about my emotional state. The isolation crept in gradually, like cold air seeping through cracks in a window. Family members who'd always included me in group chats started having separate conversations. Emma's strategy was working exactly as she'd planned. She was creating a reality where my emotional vulnerability during a difficult period became evidence of permanent instability. The family that had celebrated my inheritance just weeks earlier now viewed me with growing suspicion and concern. Emma had successfully planted the seeds of doubt about my fitness to handle Grandma's legacy, setting the stage for what she'd planned as her final move. She was ready to take her carefully crafted lies somewhere they would carry real legal weight. What happens when your own sister walks into a lawyer's office with a briefcase full of evidence that you're mentally unfit to inherit anything? The answer sits in a manila folder that Emma carried into Robert Morrison's law office on a cold Thursday morning in March, 6 weeks after Grandma's will reading. She'd scheduled the appointment under the pretense of discussing estate matters, but what she really brought was a carefully orchestrated attack designed to strip away everything Grandma had left me. Emma presented herself as the concerned sister, the responsible family member who'd been forced into an impossible position. She told Morrison that she'd been losing sleep over her growing concerns about my mental state and financial judgment. Her voice carried just the right amount of reluctant worry, like someone who desperately wanted to be wrong but couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. She explained that she'd tried talking to other family members, hoping someone could convince me to seek professional help. But everyone was too afraid to confront the obvious truth. The fabricated evidence Emma spread across Morrison's mahogany desk looked devastatingly convincing. She'd distorted my mortgage statements from the divorce period into proof of reckless spending, making normal financial struggles appear like irresponsible choices. Medical records from my therapy sessions had been taken completely out of context, with highlighted sections that made anxiety and depression sound like severe mental illness. She'd even coached character witnesses, including my ex-husband, to provide statements that painted my emotional vulnerability during the divorce as evidence of ongoing instability. Morrison examined each document with growing concern as Emma delivered her performance. Tears gathered in her eyes as she described the heartbreak of having to take action against her own sister. She spoke about how much she loved me, how she'd watched me struggle since my divorce, and how terrified she was that I'd waste Grandma's hard-earned money on impulse purchases and poor investments. Her voice cracked when she mentioned the family legacy, suggesting that Grandma's decades of careful financial planning would be destroyed by someone who couldn't manage her own checkbook. Morrison's expression grew more serious as Emma painted a picture of someone who would destroy the inheritance through emotional decision-making and financial ignorance. She described imaginary shopping sprees where I'd allegedly bought expensive clothes while my children needed basic necessities. She claimed I'd made risky investment decisions during my divorce, losing money that should have gone toward mortgage payments. None of these events ever happened, but Emma's performance was so convincing that Morrison started taking notes. Emma's ultimate goal became clear as she outlined her proposed solution. She wanted the court to declare me mentally incompetent to handle the inheritance, arguing that my emotional instability and poor financial judgment made me unfit to manage such substantial assets. She positioned herself as the responsible alternative, the sister who'd always managed money wisely and could protect both the family legacy and my own well-being. She suggested that transferring the inheritance to her would serve everyone's best interests, including mine. The lawyer's questions revealed his willingness to consider Emma's concerns seriously. He asked about my current living situation, my employment status, and whether I'd sought any professional financial advice since inheriting Grandma's assets. Emma answered each question with carefully prepared responses that made me sound unstable and unprepared. She mentioned my children with fake concern, suggesting that my poor judgment could impact their future security. As the meeting progressed, Morrison agreed to file a petition for competency evaluation, setting in motion a legal process that could strip away everything Grandma had intended for me. He explained that the court would need to assess my mental capacity and financial judgment through professional evaluation. Emma nodded sadly, as if this legal action caused her genuine pain rather than satisfaction. She signed the necessary paperwork with trembling hands, maintaining her performance as the reluctant sister forced to protect her family. Within 48 hours, I had a court date notice stapled to my door. When I saw the official documents outlining allegations of mental incompetence and financial irresponsibility, my hands started shaking so violently I could barely hold the papers. My heart was racing as I read Emma's fabricated case against me, each lie more devastating than the last. The reality hit me like a physical blow. Emma had weaponized the legal system against me, using carefully crafted lies and manipulated evidence. The summons included a date for the competency hearing, where Emma's evidence would be presented to a judge who would decide my fate. I had just 3 weeks to defend myself against what appeared to be an airtight case built on lies and manipulation. Emma had convinced our family lawyer that I was unfit to inherit anything, but she had no idea that Grandma had left behind something that would expose every single lie she'd told. How do you fight an assault you didn't see coming? The courtroom felt smaller than I'd expected, with wooden benches that reminded me of church pews and fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows across everyone's faces. Emma sat at the plaintiff's table with her lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Richardson who'd clearly done his homework. She wore a conservative navy dress and kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, maintaining her performance as the heartbroken sister forced to take action against someone she loved. My own lawyer, Patricia Wong, seemed competent, but overwhelmed by the mountain of evidence Emma had assembled against me. Richardson opened his case with devastating effectiveness, painting me as someone whose emotional instability and poor financial judgment made me completely unfit to manage substantial assets. He presented Emma's doctored bank statements as proof of reckless spending, transforming normal divorce-related expenses into evidence of financial irresponsibility. Medical records from my therapy sessions were taken completely out of context, making my healthy decision to seek professional help during a difficult period sound like ongoing mental illness that required intervention. The family members who'd once celebrated my inheritance now sat behind Emma, their faces filled with disappointment and genuine concern. My cousin Janet avoided eye contact completely, staring down at her hands as Richardson described my alleged shopping sprees and poor decision-making. Uncle Mike shook his head sadly when Emma's lawyer mentioned my job loss during the recession, as if unemployment during an economic crisis was evidence of personal failure rather than widespread circumstance. My ex-husband David took the stand and delivered the most damaging testimony yet, speaking about my emotional outbursts during our divorce proceedings while conveniently forgetting to mention his own infidelity and financial deception that had caused those reactions. His voice carried false concern as he described me as unstable and unpredictable, someone who couldn't handle stress without falling apart completely. Judge Harrison asked increasingly skeptical questions about my ability to manage such a substantial inheritance responsibly. He inquired about my current employment status, my living situation, and whether I'd sought any professional financial advice since receiving the inheritance. Each question felt like an interrogation, and I could see doubt growing in his expression as Richardson presented Emma's carefully crafted evidence. My breaking point came when Emma herself took the stand, delivering a performance that would have impressed professional actors. Tears streamed down her face as she described watching me struggle since my divorce, claiming she'd tried everything possible to help me before resorting to this legal intervention. She positioned herself as my protector, arguing that transferring the inheritance to her would serve everyone's best interests, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine heartbreak. The courtroom felt like it was shrinking around me as Emma's lies were presented as absolute truth. She'd successfully stolen not just the possibility of keeping my inheritance, but also the love and trust of family members who'd known me for decades. Looking at their faces, I could see they genuinely believed Emma's version of events. The echo of footsteps in the wooden pews behind me sounded like a funeral march as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Patricia Wong struggled to counter Emma's well-prepared assault, lacking the concrete evidence needed to expose her lies. She pointed out inconsistencies in some of the testimony and questioned the timing of Emma's sudden concerns, but her arguments felt weak against the overwhelming documentation Richardson had presented. I watched my lawyer's shoulders slump slightly as she realized how outmatched we were. Richardson's closing argument painted me as someone whose mental instability and financial irresponsibility would inevitably lead to the destruction of Grandma's carefully accumulated wealth. He suggested that appointing Emma as guardian of the inheritance would protect both the family legacy and my own well-being. As he spoke, I felt my hope draining away like water through a broken dam. As Judge Harrison called for a recess to review the evidence, defeat seemed certain. Emma had constructed a case so convincing that even I was starting to doubt my own memories of events. The weight of her lies felt crushing, and I could barely breathe as family members filed out of the courtroom without looking in my direction. Imagine watching your whole life unravel in real time, knowing that everything you've worked for is about to be stripped away by someone you trusted. Sitting alone at the defendant's table during the break, I felt completely hopeless until something Grandma Rose used to say suddenly echoed in my memory. Whenever she put away something valuable, she'd mention keeping important things where they belong, where the heart of the home beats strongest. That memory sparked something that felt like hope, for the first time all morning. I practically ran out of that courtroom during the recess, ignoring Patricia's confused questions about where I was going. My hands shook as I drove the 15 minutes to Grandma's house on Maple Street, the house that was supposed to be mine but might be stripped away in less than 2 hours. The key still worked in the front door, and I stepped into the familiar smell of lavender and old wood that always meant safety and unconditional love. The kitchen looked exactly as Grandma had left it, with her ancient recipe box sitting on the counter next to the window where she'd always kept it. The lavender scent was strongest here, mixed with the faint aroma of cinnamon and vanilla that seemed baked into the wooden cabinets themselves. I remembered her saying something about keeping records where they belonged, always with that mysterious smile when she'd put away something valuable. She'd tap the side of that recipe box and mention how the heart of any home lived in its kitchen, where families gathered and memories were made. My fingers trembled as I examined the wooden recipe box more carefully than I ever had before. The back panel felt different somehow, slightly raised compared to the sides. I pressed against it gently and heard a soft click as a hidden compartment opened, revealing a leather-bound journal that looked like it had been waiting for me to find it. The journal felt heavy in my hands, substantial and important, in a way that made my heart race. The first entry was dated 5 years earlier, written in Grandma's careful handwriting. She'd been documenting Emma's visits, recording conversations, and taking detailed notes about Emma's behavior and comments. The entries spanned 5 full years, revealing Grandma's growing understanding of Emma's manipulative nature and her increasing concerns about Emma's true intentions regarding the family inheritance. Patricia Wong stood up with Grandma's leathered journal in her hands, announcing that new evidence had come to light that would completely change the proceedings. Emma's confident expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered, probably assuming this was some desperate last-minute attempt to save a hopeless case. The courtroom fell into stunned silence as Patricia opened the journal to the first page and began reading Grandma's careful documentation of Emma's visits over the past 5 years. Papers rustled as family members shifted uncomfortably, and I could hear someone's sharp intake of breath from the gallery. Each entry systematically dismantled every piece of fabricated evidence Emma had presented. Where Emma claimed I'd been emotionally unstable for years, Grandma's notes showed her recording specific instances of Emma trying to plant seeds of doubt about my mental state. Where Emma suggested I'd always been financially irresponsible, Grandma documented Emma's deliberate attempts to exaggerate normal divorce-related struggles into evidence of incompetence. Patricia announced that Grandma had also left behind audio recordings of Emma's visits. She pressed play on the small digital recorder, and Emma's own voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "I'm researching competency challenges now," Emma's recorded voice said with chilling calculation. "If she gets anything substantial, I'll have grounds to prove she's mentally unfit." The first recording captured Emma discussing her plans to manipulate family members against me, specifically mentioning how she could use my therapy sessions and financial struggles during the divorce as ammunition for a competency challenge. Emma's face drained of every drop of color as her recorded words contradicted everything she'd testified under oath just hours earlier. Her voice carried none of the tearful concern she'd displayed in court, revealing instead a methodical plan to steal my inheritance through legal manipulation. The second recording was even more devastating, capturing Emma coordinating with my ex-husband David. "I'll help with your financial problems if you provide the right statements about her emotional instability," her voice promised with calculating coldness. She outlined specific examples he should emphasize and coached him on how to frame normal marital difficulties as evidence of mental incompetence. Family members in the courtroom began shifting uncomfortably as they realized how thoroughly Emma had manipulated them. Uncle Mike's face went pale when he heard Emma discussing how to use his concerns about my well-being as validation for her competency challenge. Cousin Janet covered her mouth in horror as Emma's recorded voice described turning family love and concern into weapons against me. The people who'd believed they were protecting me suddenly understood they'd been manipulated into becoming Emma's unwitting accomplices. Judge Harrison's expression grew stern as he listened to recording after recording of Emma planning her legal attack. His voice carried unmistakable authority when he interrupted the playback to address Emma directly about the serious discrepancy between her sworn testimony and the evidence of premeditation now before the court. Richardson appeared stunned as he realized his client had committed perjury on a massive scale, but the damage was already done. Judge Harrison announced the immediate dismissal of the competency petition, stating that the evidence revealed a pattern of manipulation and fraud that undermined every aspect of Emma's claims. My hands trembled as relief flooded through me, and tears I'd been holding back for weeks finally spilled over. Family members who'd sat behind Emma during the morning session crossed the courtroom to approach me with tearful apologies. Cousin Janet grabbed my hands and whispered how sorry she was for doubting me, explaining how Emma had slowly poisoned her perception with carefully crafted lies. Uncle Mike hugged me with tears in his eyes, apologizing for questioning my ability to handle the inheritance. Judge Harrison wasn't finished with Emma. He explained that perjury in inheritance cases carries severe legal ramifications, potentially leading to criminal charges and imprisonment because it undermines the integrity of the legal system. He announced that he was referring Emma's case to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud and perjury charges. The woman who'd tried to steal my inheritance now faced the possibility of substantial fines and lengthy prison sentences. Patricia revealed the final devastating detail from Grandma's journal. The documentation showed that Emma had attempted similar manipulation tactics with other elderly relatives in the past, establishing a pattern of predatory behavior toward vulnerable family members. Grandma had been protecting not just me, but potentially future victims of Emma's schemes. Emma sat frozen at the plaintiff's table as the full scope of her exposure became clear. Her carefully constructed lies had crumbled in less than 30 minutes, replaced by irrefutable evidence of her criminal behavior. The inheritance was secured, my reputation was restored, and the family finally saw the truth about who deserved Grandma's legacy. Grandma Rose had known this day would come, and she armed me with the proof. As we left the courthouse, I felt overwhelming gratitude for her protection from beyond the grave, but I was beginning to understand that her greatest gift went far deeper than the money itself. Emma's words about my instability and inability to handle money echoed hollow now, completely overturned by Grandma's meticulous preparation. Her real gift wasn't the inheritance itself, but teaching me that genuine love means protecting the people we care about from those who would exploit them, even when we're no longer around to stand guard ourselves. She spent 5 years documenting Emma's manipulation because she recognized something I was too trusting to see. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any other wound because it shatters the assumption that blood creates loyalty. But Grandma proved that truth and careful preparation can shield us from even the most calculated attacks. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up exposing their own darkness instead. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and never underestimate the power of being prepared. If you've ever been underestimated or betrayed, hit like and share your story in the comments below, because truth always has a way of coming out.